So welcome to Lockdown 2. We're back at home. Well, I'm back at home. Lizzie is still in Florida, as you can see. How is it in Florida, Lizzie?
Yes, Florida has been very lovely and sunny, and it's been amazing being here covering a big story. But that ends today, and I'm heading home to Lockdown Mark 2.
Lockdown Mark 2 and isolation, I suppose, as well, for 2 weeks.
Yeah, self-isolation for 14 days.
I hope you like the walls of your flat, because you'll be staring at them quite a lot.
Yeah.
So we've been doing royal news here. You've been kind of doing the election news and trying to keep abreast of what's happening royally. Last week you passed the test, so do you want me to do another test for you?
You can do. I'm not sure how well I'll do this week, but you can test me on American politics if you like.
Okay, I'm going to go with which sibling of Princess Diana has criticised a television programme?
Earl Spencer.
And which programme did he criticise?
The BBC's Panorama interview with Martin Bashir.
Which grandchildren of the Queen have been referred to a regulator over their endorsement of a COVID app?
Zara Tindall and her husband Mike.
Okay, that's not bad. You're doing all right. Which member of the royal family had COVID and we didn't know it?
Prince William.
I know. Well, there's a lot to talk about there. So why don't you do your Robinson's Royal Rundown from Florida? Is that sunshine I can see in the window behind you?
Yeah, that sunshine you can see. The water's just down there. Yeah, it's really lovely and warm, and it's going to be one hell of a shock coming back, I think.
Actually, the weather is quite nice. You can see some sunshine at the back of me as well. Very, very foggy this morning when I woke up and went for a run. Didn't hit any trees this time, for those of you who've been following my social media. But the sun's out. So it is actually a bit sunny here, but it's cold, very cold. You'll notice the difference when you come back.
Lucky I'll just be indoors then, isn't it? Because I won't be going anywhere.
Indeed, but the Sunshine State is officially a Trump state, despite all the stuff that's been going on in Pennsylvania and Nevada and in Arizona. Florida, they didn't hang about. They went straight for Mr. Trump. Straight
to Mr. Trump, yeah, he really won over the Latino vote here, and there was quite a significant margin he put between him and Biden in the end. And this is known as the 1% state, but it's not that anymore. It certainly wasn't in this election.
And how many electoral college votes, remind me, do they have in Florida?
They have 29, which is huge. But we're waiting on a big one from Pennsylvania. That would
20 votes there, aren't there? So, well, listen, by the time people are watching this, we might even have a decision. We might even have a potentially new occupant of the White House in the new year. But anyway, as I said last week, this isn't a US election podcast. If you want one of those, we do have one on ITV. It's called "Will Trump Win?" ? They might have to rename it now. Will Trump concede? Perhaps.
Will he ever concede?
Well, indeed, yeah. Kicking and screaming out of the White House if that so indeed happens. Anyway, you can listen to that via the App Store and all the rest of it. But this is the Royal Rota podcast, and we will talk royal things, and Lizzie will tell you about the Robinson's Royal Rundown.
Lizzie will try and tell you about the Robinson's Royal Rundown anyway. So as you say, this week we found out that Prince William had coronavirus right back in April. And he's kept it a secret until now, and that's come out and caused some question marks about why we didn't know and why nobody told us. So lots to unpack there. There is been a royal rebubbling. The Queen and Duke of Edinburgh are both back together at Windsor. They've joined back together as HMS Bubble for Lockdown Mark 2. And I suspect we'll see lots of Zoom calls from the royals again as we all go back into lockdown. Camilla this week, she was at the Westminster Abbey at their Field of Remembrance for a service that happens annually. There's a field of poppies remembering our war dead, and she attended the annual event there. There was a new portrait released of her this week, to mark her new role as Colonel-in-Chief of the Rifles. And we found out that next week on Wednesday the 11th, Charles and Camilla will attend a service to mark the centenary of the burial of the unknown soldier. And as you mentioned earlier, Earl Spencer has demanded an inquiry into that famous Panorama interview that Martin Bashir did with Princess Diana.
famous Martin Bashir interview on Panorama where Diana famously said there were three of us in this marriage. A lot to talk about there. So let's restart with the Queen then. So let's start. We did loads on Camilla last week, so I'm going to put her right at the very bottom of the running order today. No offence to Camilla, but she had her moment in the Royal Rota sunshine last week. But the Queen and Prince Philip back together because he was at Wood Farm in Sandringham. She was at Windsor. She went up to visit him last weekend. We know that. I think one of the newspapers reported that. And she basically collected him and brought him back to Windsor because on Saturday, I know this because I was presenting on news bulletins on Saturday when this rather chaotic press conference happened, got delayed and happened just as we went on air. But anyway, that was always a surprise to a lot of people, the fact that we were going into lockdown. So the Queen and the Duke made a decision, probably, I would have thought on Sunday, that Prince Philip should come back with her and get back into that famous bubble at Windsor Castle. Yeah,
it all feels a bit familiar, doesn't it? It feels like where we were back in March when we did this once before. It's all the same sort of things happening again, and that's just part of it, isn't it? But what's quite sweet is that their 73rd wedding anniversary will be on the 20th of November, so they will be together for that at Windsor, which is lovely.
73rd wedding anniversary is unbelievable, isn't it? It's very interesting. Funny enough, in this household, some people in the household are rewatching The Crown, so I've been rewatching some of those previous episodes. I know there's a new one due out, but it's just a reminder of just quite how long the Queen and Duke have been married. 1947, wasn't it? November 1947 when they got married at Westminster Abbey. And actually, this Remembrance Sunday this weekend, isn't it, in the UK? But we're rather expecting that the Queen will do what she normally does, which is to watch the service from the balcony of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and watch her son, Prince Charles, lead the nation in remembrance.
Yeah, the annual service at the Cenotaph is one of the most important events in the Queen's diary, and also, for the royal family. But I can't think that there is any way, we said this last week, that she would miss that or not mark that in some way, and we haven't had details yet that we can talk about in terms of what they'll do on Sunday. But it is a really important day for the royal family, and I can't think that we won't see them marking it in some way.
What you mean is we've had some details, we just can't share them. Yeah, but we'll talk about them. We'll talk about them next week. However, I mean, another test for you. What is the significance of the Cenotaph, the tribute on Whitehall in central London, just outside Downing Street? What's the significance of that this year?
Is this to do with, are you testing me on the centenary here?
I'm testing on the centenary because it was the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which is in Westminster Abbey, famously where the Queen was married and where she had her coronation. But the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was actually created in November 1920, and the body of the unknown soldier that was brought from a battlefield after the First World War stopped at the newly built Cenotaph and then went on to Westminster Abbey. So there was going to be a massive celebration or commemoration of that this year. The Queen was going to trace the steps of that gun carriage as it took the body of the unknown soldier to Westminster Abbey, and actually she can't do that yet this year. As like everything else, it's cancelled because of COVID.
Yeah, and we said a few weeks ago on this podcast that normally you would see huge crowds of people coming to pay their respects. It's a day in our calendar. We're all wearing, see behind my hair here, my poppy. You see it?
That's it. Yes, yeah. What does he call your hair? It gets a bit frizzy in the front.
Oh, yes. It really does. Yeah,
like there's a friend with Monica.
It's gone a bit Monica-y. It is a huge day for the whole country. We have a silence at 11 o'clock, but this year crowds are being encouraged to stay at home and pay their respects from there.
So the Queen back with Prince Philip in Windsor Castle. No pictures to show you of that. So if you're listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, you're not missing any pictures this week because we don't have any of the Queen as yet. or of Prince Philip in recent times. We can, however, show you, which I think is something quite significant, which is somebody doing a Zoom call, a virtual opening of an NHS hospital in Birmingham, which happened in April. This was one of the new Nightingale hospitals, emergency hospitals established around the country to deal with coronavirus. And Prince William opened it, and this is what he said.
I'm delighted to be with you all today, in digital spirit, that is, at least. And let me start by reiterating all that has been said so far and paying tribute to the incredible work that NHS staff across the country have been doing to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. Their selfless commitment has touched the hearts of the entire nation. The building you are standing in is yet another example of how people across the country have risen to this unprecedented challenge.
The significance of why we're showing you something in April now is that when he did that, he had coronavirus and just didn't tell anyone. It was 2 or 3 weeks after his dad got it, a couple of weeks after the Prime Minister got it. It was a time when the Prime Minister was in hospital, seriously ill with coronavirus. And Prince William and his aides, and we can debate whether this was the right decision or not, concluded that they wouldn't tell the country that he'd had it. I don't know why. They didn't want to worry people. And we didn't find out until, I think, Monday of this week when it was on the front page of the Sun newspaper.
Yeah, astonishing. I was, amazed when I saw that. But, the reason, as you say, was that they didn't want to alarm people. The country had already had the news that the heir to the throne had coronavirus. Boris Johnson was, by that point, in hospital with coronavirus. And but I think, from the reports we've seen, that William he wasn't hospitalised. He stayed at Anmer Hall in Norfolk, but he was reportedly struggling to breathe. So, hit quite hard by it, by all accounts.
You're right, and apparently he told somebody, who I'll have to keep that source secret, but he told somebody that he was struggling to breathe. He had a very big difficulty with breathing, which is, kind of normal for coronavirus. So you can't really say that his conditions were light; they were quite serious, and it kind of sparked a debate about whether or not we should have known that the second in line to the throne had coronavirus, and whether his aides and he took the right decision to keep it quiet.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about whether that, in terms of transparency, whether the aides should have told us that he had it. But I think it was, from what we're being told, it was done in good faith, that, their intentions were good, that they were trying at a time when there was an enormous flow of bad news to sort of protect the country from an additional piece of bad news. But for those people that avidly watch the court circular, there was quite a gap in engagements in April, which was a really busy month for both the Cambridges in terms of Zoom calls, which we got very used to. And he did a video call on the 9th of April with Moorlands Community Charity. And then there was a gap until the 16th of April, which is when he did the virtual opening of the Nightingale, which you mentioned.
Yes, so and actually some of my counterparts for other publications, I think Robert Jobson at the Evening Standard, I think Richard Palmer at the Daily Express, both royal correspondents for their respective publications, actually accused Kensington Palace of lying about his coronavirus diagnosis. So it didn't go down well in all quarters. That said, William and Kate were praising nurses this week, weren't they? They were actually honouring those nurses who had done so much to treat people and work their socks off during the initial pandemic. And there's lots of evidence that things are getting equally as bad for the second wave, but they were honouring them last week in a programme on ITV called the Pride of Britain Awards.
During lockdown, we joined people up and down the country to applaud the NHS and our key workers each week. Their hard work still goes on, and we remain indebted to them for all that they do.
It's fitting that we are here today at Britain's oldest hospital to thank and celebrate our NHS staff and to honour them with a Pride of Britain Award.
So that was William and Kate at the Pride of Britain Awards. And actually they were talking to one of our ITV presenter colleagues, Kate Garraway, who works for Good Morning Britain. And she has a very difficult personal story in that her husband, Derek Draper, remains seriously ill with coronavirus. In fact, she told a newspaper last week that he's only uttered one word since March and now, and that was when he said the word pain. So she's having a terribly difficult time experiencing coronavirus. And it was Kate along with Kate Garraway, along with William and Kate, who presented the Pride of Britain Awards to those medics from the NHS on a sort of a thank you to everyone in the NHS, wasn't it?
Yeah, a thank you to everyone, not just from them, but the award was given to frontline workers across the NHS from the nation.
Yes, exactly. And I think they look quite moved. And actually, it was quite a moving programme. If you watched the whole programme, the Pride of Britain Awards, and some of it was dominated by the coronavirus pandemic. It was very moving. But Kate and William made a show of that. I think they recorded it some weeks ago. It's normally a live show or as live show. But again, as with many things this year, it was not live. Yeah,
Kate and William, I don't know if you remember, there were some photographs that leaked out of Kate and William with Kate Garraway, and people sort of were putting two and two together and realising that they were doing something for Pride of Britain. And they recorded that at St Bart's Hospital on the day that Kate's Hold Still community exhibition went live around London. Remember, we were and then St Bart's seeing some of those pictures. So they took the opportunity to record it that day when they were there.
Should we talk about William's mum? I mean, Diana is such an iconic figure that she comes up in the news all the time. But this is a particularly difficult one for the BBC, because we're talking about a very famous Panorama clip. I'm not even sure if we're allowed to show it for copyright reasons, but the famous Panorama clip interview that she did with the journalist Martin Bashir when she said there were three of us in this marriage. And it was watched by something like, was it 23 million people? And yet, Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, is now alleging that the BBC used some very, how do we put this? Well, he's alleging that they used some malpractice in order to convince him and Diana that she should do the interview.
That's right. It seems amazing, really, that all these years on, that this has sort of resurfaced. You know, that famous interview, there are still question marks over it. And Earl Spencer is demanding an inquiry into the alleged use of fake bank statements, which were shown to him in a bid to try and secure the interview with Princess Diana.
Yeah, and actually he's asking for an apology and a further inquiry from the BBC, perhaps even an independent inquiry, because the BBC looked into this in 1996 and said sorry at the time for one of their members of staff mocked up these bank statements claiming that some people in Earl Spencer's office were receiving payments to leak information about Princess Diana. The slightly bigger allegation, however, is that some other bank statements showed that some members of the royal household were being paid by the Secret Service to leak information, to spy on Princess Diana effectively, which one of the things that she's always suspected. And perhaps, who knows, these are claims, these are allegations, and the BBC will claim they did everything properly, but perhaps they were used by Panorama to prey perhaps on one of Princess Diana's weaknesses.
Yeah, there was a Channel 4 documentary recently, and in that they talked a lot about how at the time Diana was quite vulnerable and quite paranoid, and that this was used to sort of take advantage of somebody in a state where she felt, where she was so paranoid.
I mean, we can't say much more on it, because actually the journalist himself, Martin Bashir, who still works for the BBC as their religion editor, is actually quite seriously, or actually very seriously ill with coronavirus himself at the moment, and hasn't been able to respond to any of these allegations. But if you go on Twitter, you'll see that Earl Spencer has put some comments on there setting out his argument. I don't think this one is going to go away anytime soon. In fact, ITV have made a two-part documentary next week. It goes out on Monday night at 9 p.m. in the UK and on Tuesday night at 9 p.m. And that will look into these claims and these allegations. And from my understanding, and I can't say exactly who's in it at the moment, but there are some key people that they've interviewed in that documentary. So this one's likely to run. And there's some controversy also, isn't there, Lizzie, for some of the Queen's grandchildren, or one of her grandchild and her grandson-in-law.
Yeah, that's right. Zara Tindall and Mike Tindall. I'm just going to get the story up. An advert for a COVID sort of passport app, which has been promoted by the couple, has been referred to the medical regulator over concerns that it contradicts health guidance. And this app was designed to allow sports fans back into stadiums. It was supposed to be sort of a passport to say you were safe to be able to get back into stadiums, but it's caused controversy, hasn't it?
Quite a good endorsement as well, you think, for the app itself, that you've got Mike Tindall, who's a former international rugby player, and his wife Zara Tindall, previously Zara Phillips, Princess Anne's daughter, who herself was a medalist, an Olympic medalist in equestrian. So quite significant they got them to do it. If we can show you some of the video that is in question, the promotion video, we will. It basically centers around the fact that this app was claiming that you could take an antibody test which would show you whether or not you're positive. The facts of the matter are, and this is why the complaint centers on, is that an antibody test is something you take after you've had COVID to see if you've had it in the past. And the company VST Enterprises have put out a statement saying that the test that they showed in the film was for, quote, illustrative purposes only. But again, a sign of difficulty when you're connected to the royal family, and I know Zara and Mike aren't working members of the royal family, but yet another sign that when you endorse something, what was the Chinese milk story we did a little while ago, when you endorse something, it can lead to some questions.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we'll have to wait and see. But as you say, VST Enterprises have responded. And, I suspect that that'll be the end of that.
Yeah, we'll see whether the story goes on and on. I don't think it's one of the biggest ones in the world, but it's certainly one that has raised some question marks over members of the royal family endorsing certain commercial enterprises, etc. As we discussed on this podcast a little while ago when Peter Phillips was promoting British milk to China, I believe, which was an interesting story. Should we finish off with Camilla? I mean, a couple of, here's a new portrait of Camilla that was released. She took over, if you remember, we told you back in the summer, she took over as the Colonel-in-Chief of the Rifles Regiment, an honorary title that she was handed by the Duke of Edinburgh. That was the last time we saw him, I think, in moving pictures when he was at Windsor Castle. There's a new portrait of Camilla that has been released by the Rifles as their new Colonel-in-Chief.
That's right. And another thing to note about this photograph is that she's wearing a brooch, and that's a new brooch that was commissioned by the regiment for her. And now she's taken over this role. And she released a message to go with this portrait that was on the Clarence House social media channels.
Now, she's also been at the Field of Remembrance. Now, I remember going to the Field of Remembrance last year when Harry and Meghan went there, which was a very big event. Again, different times, not COVID, no social distancing required. But this is the Field of Remembrance outside Westminster Abbey, which is a little sort of garden, if you like, outside Westminster Abbey, where they put rows and rows and rows and rows of little crosses with poppies on them to remember all those who lost their lives, not just in the First World War, but in the Second World War, in other crises that we've had since the Korean War, etc. So that's something that Camilla went to. She's actually wearing, I think, a poppy face mask, wasn't she?
She was, yeah, and she was actually dressed in the Rifles dress, which links to her, what we were just talking about. But you're right, for the last 7 years, it's a visit that Prince Harry has done, and it is now a role that Camilla has taken over from him as he sort of stepped back from being a working member of the royal family. And it'll probably be one of those, we know that when he left, one of the hardest things for him to walk away from were his military commitments. That means so much to Prince Harry. That it's a really moving event. Normally there are sort of more than 1,000 veterans there with their families, and this year only a small number could gather. And Camilla mentioned that it was such a shame that there weren't more there, but obviously because of coronavirus, to keep people safe, they just couldn't have the numbers they normally would.
I remember going last year, and it was very busy. I mean, Harry and Meghan were both there and spent a lot of time with the veterans who were all standing next to their particular patches which represent their own regiments. Talking of Harry and Meghan, we haven't really heard from them in terms of the US election. I mean, you've spoken more about the US election than Meghan has, which she was doing rather frequently beforehand, but clearly until there's a result, so I think they've obviously decided not to engage in the US electoral process for the time being.
Yeah, so we know that Meghan voted which is no great surprise, I think. We know that she's very engaged in what's going on over here in America. And she spoke a lot, sort of a few months ago, earlier on in the campaign, about the importance of people getting out there to vote. And she talked about this election being more important than ever before. But she has gone quiet on this. We haven't heard from her in a while, since that video where Prince Harry joined her and they talked about rejecting hate speech, and that caused a bit of controversy, and they've gone quiet since then.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Prince Harry actually did something for Remembrance Sunday here in the UK this weekend. But just keep your eye out on our social media channels, because if that does happen, we will bring it to you. So have you enjoyed your time in Florida?
It's been lovely. It has been lovely. But do you know what we've forgotten to talk about?
What?
And I missed this off in my rundown. It's Prince Charles and sustainable fashion and Vogue.
Yes, actually, there was an interesting picture, very nice picture, actually, wasn't there, of Prince Charles in Vogue?
There was, and he's done an interview with Edward Enninful, and it's all about sustainable fashion. There's a culture nowadays of fast throwaway fashion, and Prince Charles is really trying to promote that we build an industry where products can last for a long time. We look at how we can repair things. He spoke there in the interview about how as a child he saw a cobbler ripping off the soles of shoes and replacing them, how he patches up his own clothes, and he really wants to promote this, widely.
I've always admired the way you dress, so tell me about your sense of style. Where does it come from?
I thought I was like a stopped clock. I'm right twice every 24 hours. Anyway, people then come round after 25 years to dressing like I do. But no, I mean, I'm very glad you think it has style. I just
very much so.
I mind to a certain degree. I mind about detail and color and things like that, and color combinations. I'm one of those people who hates throwing anything away or wasting anything. So I rather like trying to keep things as long as I possibly can. Hence, as long as I retain the same shape and can go on fitting into things, I'd rather have them repaired, you know what I mean, and maintained, and even patched if necessary.
Although when you say patches up his own clothes, what you mean is he gets some other people to patch up his clothes. Presumably he's not there with the needle and thread, or maybe Camilla is, I don't know, but one does that very much. But yes, not surprising that the Prince is a recycler of fashion, and actually doesn't he have some suits from quite some time ago, but so does Princess Anne, doesn't she? She's been seen in outfits that she once wore in the 1990s or something.
And actually, for those interested, Clarence House have done on their Instagram stories, they've done a really nice look back at Prince Charles wearing some of his clothes through the ages. So you can see he really does, look after his clothes, and is sort of repairs, reuses, and he really wants to promote that people don't just throw away clothes, and the fashion industry looks at how it can help that.
He is probably buying his clothes from shops that aren't Zara or Primark, however, but they do last, and he does keep them for a long time.
And actually, students from, it's called the Modern Artisan Project. It's a training program founded by the Prince's Foundation, and they're about to launch a clothing collection, and it's all focused around sustainability.
We will bring you that detail. You can come back and write those stories, because you'll be in the UK when that happens, presumably. Flight tonight, is it?
Flight tonight, land tomorrow, yes.
Okay. Tired, 5 hours behind, 2 weeks at home, isolating, unless they change the rules, which they might do. There is some talk they might reduce it to 5 days, but we shall see. No one will be happier than you. And all the presenters we've had out there, Tom Bradby, Julie Etchingham, Raggy Omar, they'll all be wanting minimum amounts of isolation time. So we look forward to having you back in the UK, although we won't see you in person for some considerable time. Yeah. But back on the Royal Beat next week then.
Definitely, full focus back on the Royal Beat next week.
Full focus Royal Beat. Your attachment to the American Bureau is over until the next election.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we still await a result. Right, thanks so much for joining us. As ever, you can keep up, you can subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Lizzie's Twitter account is
at Lizzie ITV.
I'm at Chris Ship ITV, our Instagram account for all things royal and all the best pictures of the week. We update it as often as we can. It's at ITV News Royals on Instagram. We will see you next week. She will be in the UK. I'll still be in the UK, but we'll all be socially distant and doing things virtually as ever. See you then.